Most chess players don't lose because of a brilliant sacrifice. They lose because of a small decision they didn't think mattered. A pawn move, 1 square forward, silent, forgettable, and yet this is where most games are secretly decided. When people think about chess, they focus on queens, rooks, and kings. They wait for tactics, traps, and dramatic checkmates. But the truth is uncomfortable. By the time those moments arrive, the outcome has often already been shaped quietly by pawns. Pawns don't shout. They don't attack across the board. They don't look powerful, but they decide where power is allowed to exist. Every pawn move changes the geometry of the board. It opens lines, closes doors, creates weaknesses, or builds long-term strength. And once a pawn moves, it can never go back. That single fact makes pawns brutally honest. They punish careless thinking more than any other piece. Grandmasters understand this. Beginners ignore it. A weak pawn structure isn't flashy, but it slowly suffocates your position. A single pawn push at the wrong time can create a permanent weakness, one your opponent will exploit for the next 20 moves. And the worst part, you often don't realize it until it's too late. This is why strong players spend so much time thinking about pawn decisions that look boring to everyone else. They know something most players don't want to admit. Chess is not decided by the biggest moves, but by the smallest, irreversible ones. And this isn't just about chess. Life works the same way. Most outcomes aren't controlled by dramatic moments, but by small, repeated decisions that shape what becomes possible later. The moves you don't respect today quietly determine the limits you'll face tomorrow. In this video, we're going to explore why a single pawn decision can control the entire game and what that teaches us about strategy, patience, and power. Because once you truly understand pawns, you'll never see the board or your decisions the same way again. How pawns control space and freedom to understand why pawns secretly control every game. You need to stop seeing them as pieces and start seeing them as rules. Pawns decide where pieces are allowed to go. A single pawn move can take away squares, restrict movement, and silently limit your opponent's options. This is what strong players mean when they talk about space. Space isn't about having more pieces active, it's about denying freedom. Imagine two positions that look almost identical. Sim materia, but one side feels comfortable while the other feels cramped and awkward. The difference is usually pawn structure. Pawns create borders. They draw invisible lines on the board. A pawn chain points in a direction, telling you where your play belongs. Advance pawns carelessly, and you give your opponent targets. Hold them too long, and you suffocate your own pieces. Every pawn move is a trade-off between control and flexibility. This is why experienced players hesitate before pushing a pawn that beginners move instantly. They ask questions beginners don't. What squares will this give up? What lines will this open? What weaknesses will exist 10 moves from now? Once a pawn moves, the board remembers it forever. A hole created by a pawn advance doesn't disappear. An isolated pawn doesn't magically heal. These small structural details shape the entire middle game and determine which side gets to attack and which side must defend. And again, this goes far beyond chess. In life, small decisions create invisible boundaries. They define what opportunities remain open and which ones quietly close. Freedom isn't lost all at once. It disappears one small choice at a time. Pawns teach us this uncomfortable truth. Control doesn't come from force. It comes from positioning. And the player who understands space doesn't rush. They let the board and the opponent run out of good options. One of the most dangerous phrases in chess is also one of the most common. It est just a pawn move. That mindset has ruined countless games because there is no such thing as a harmless pawn move. Unlike pieces, pawns can't retreat. When you push a pawn, you commit to a structure, to a plan, to a future position you may not fully understand yet. And if that commitment is wrong, you live with it for the rest of the game. A single pawn push can weaken a king, open a diagonal, or give your opponent a permanent outpost. These consequences don't always appear immediately. Sometimes they wait patiently, like a debt collecting interest. This is why strong players often lose games that look equal on the surface. Material is balanced, no obvious blunders, and yet one side slowly collapses. The reason is usually hidden deep in the pawn structure, a decision made long before the trouble began. Chess, punishers, impatience. Beginners push pawns to feel active. Experienced players hold back because they understand timing. A pawn move made too early can be as damaging as one made too late. The difference between a strong position and a weak one is often when a pawn moves, not if it moves. Life follows the same logic. Most long-term problems don't come from dramatic failures. They come from small shortcuts taken without thinking. Decisions that felt insignificant at the time slowly shape constraints that are hard to escape later. Pawns expose this truth brutally. They force you to respect consequences you can't undo. If you want to play better, chessor, live more deliberately, have to learn this discipline. Don't rush irreversible decisions, because what feels small today may quietly control everything tomorrow. At the highest level of chess, games are rarely decided by spectacular moves. They are decided by accumulation. One small advantage, one tiny weakness, one slightly better pawn structure. Over time, these details compound until the outcome feels inevitable. This is the final lesson pawns teach us. Power doesn't arrive suddenly, it grows quietly. When you watch elite players, you'll notice something strange. They often spend more time thinking about simple pawn moves than flashy tactics. Not because those moves are exciting, but because they understand leverage. A well-placed pawn doesn't attack the king directly. It controls squares. It supports pieces. It limits counterplay. And eventually, it creates a position where the opponent has no good choices left. That's real control. And this philosophy applies far beyond the chessboard. In life, we admire dramatic success stories. But what we don't see are the countless small decisions that made those outcomes possible. Habits, discipline, patience, choices that felt boring, slow, or insignificant at the time. Just like pawns. The danger is not ignoring big moments. The danger is underestimating small ones. Every irreversible decision, no matter how minor it seems, shapes the structure of your future. Some give you flexibility. Others lock you into weaknesses you didn't plan for. Chess is honest about this. It doesn't allow excuses. Once a pawn moves, the truth of that decision stays on the board. If you want to play better games, you must respect small moves. If you want better outcomes, you must respect small choices. Because in the end, the game is not controlled by the loudest pieces, but by the quiet decisions no one thought mattered. And that is the true philosophy of the pawn.
What should we discuss about chess next? Comment below. Thank you for watching.